Okay, 3 words. Glitches in Halo. Honestly, these 3 words are kind of one of our favorite parts about Halo, just exploring all of the little nuanced details or things that aren't necessarily supposed to be caught or recognized. And whether it's things like breaking out of maps, or just noticing that something doesn't quite look right, we have a good time just taking note of it. And while we look at these weird occurrences all the time, one thing we really haven't focused in on lately, or zeroed in on lately, are Halo textures, or weird textures and graphical glitches that occur on the visual front of the game, even if the rest of the game is still working properly. And it's always fun to take a look at some of these weird occurrences that are commonplace in Halo, or weird occurrences that only happen once in a very rare instance. So let's go ahead and look into this. Okay, if you've done any amount of breaking out of maps in Halo, you've probably encountered the smear texture effect that we talk about on this channel from time to time. It kind of looks like those moments if you're in like a dressing room at a clothing store and you kind of fold the mirrors to make this infinite mirror effect, but then it gets even more trippy if you move while looking at it because it shows the reflection of what you were looking at before. It might make you nauseous, but nonetheless, they're in various Halo games from throughout the years. And typically it's visual when you break out of a map and you go to an area where you're not supposed to, and there's just no data in that specific spot to fill that texture. We actually have a really interesting explanation that someone left in one of our comments that, while we're not game developers by any means, seems to make enough sense. It's actually the game not having an actual texture, and because of this, we're just seeing into the void. So the engine backtracks and just shows hundreds of copies of previous frames, and it still just looks very sickening at times. But nonetheless, throughout a lot of the Halo games, you can experience this, and while some of the older Halo games didn't go for the full-on smearing effect that we see in like Halo 3, they did go with just this black no texture to cover up these areas that don't have a properly assigned texture as a default. But then if you're also interested in other things that didn't quite get textured properly along the way, look no forward than things called Da Vinci Code objects by the Halo fan community. Essentially, in Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST, there are several objects on several different places, different levels and multiplayer maps, that if you look closely, you can actually see that utilize a default texture as a replacement to whatever the final rendered texture was supposed to be. For whatever reason, these objects were not wrapped by the proper texture, so instead the game defaults to a UV unwrapped texture, which is typically used to render different textures on 3D models instead. Obviously, the name draws inspiration just because of the way that it looks like some secret code, similarly to the Da Vinci Code cryptex, and you can find them on various maps like Sandtrap, Sandbox. There's a cube on the level Heretic. If you break out of the map in Halo 3, you can see a ton of smear effects, and even Da Vinci Towers. And this was one of my first times actually encountering one in the wild, but it was on Halo 3 ODST Oni Alpha site. I was trying to see if maybe I could find some glyphs or something down the elevator shaft for whatever reason. And look, there it was, this little pink looking texture, and I totally freaked out thinking I just discovered the secret of the glyphs. That wasn't at all the case, but still, I was proud of myself. Moving away from just more issues of leaving things out, there are some other just visual oddities that have occurred throughout Halo. If we go all the way back to Combat Evolved, one of my favorite textures or things that exists in Combat Evolved is on Captain Keyes' patch. It just says, "Hello, my name Keyes." I've talked about this before. I don't know why I have this appreciation for the incorrect grammar and how it's all crammed together as one word to fit it. I don't know if it was intentional. I don't know if it was an inside joke, but nonetheless, it seriously is one of the best things in Combat Evolved, hands down. Also, if you've been following the Master Chief Collection's development recently, you would know that they are currently flighting and also working on releasing some updated visuals to the Halo games to make the textures and visual appearances look a lot more like what they originally did back in Combat Evolved. And some of you who watch our live streams or our other videos might remember our very fantastic Christmas special where we had our friend Peter put together a fantastic Christmas mod and we saved Christmas. He also helped us find footage for this video, putting together a lot of the comparisons of how Halo Combat Evolved originally looked versus what we actually see in the Master Chief Collection before this big update that they're flighting. Some interesting things to notice are sometimes times some of the textures are different and they're grittier and shinier in alternate versions. It was kind of weird because sometimes Master Chief looked shiny in one version and then grittier later on in that same version, but then MCC was the reverse at times. I suspect Master Chief is supposed to be maybe cleaner in the original Combat Evolved at the beginning and gets grittier and dirtier over time, but then MCC maybe didn't translate that, or maybe it's all in my head and I'm just imagining different things. I definitely realized in the Keyes cutscene, Jacob Keyes' bathwater looks completely different between the two different versions of the game. And also, while this one probably shouldn't fully count in this video, when we were looking into the whole body stretches thing from our other video we did recently, we found this image of someone who had a very similar glitch happen in Halo Combat Evolved, and it is a visual glitch. It does seem like maybe it would be the source of inspiration for a creepypasta, but we wanted to still mention it and include it too. We've also had weird experiences on our own occurrences when we've played through the Halo games. Like one time in Combat Evolve, Luke died during a cutscene and then his screen was flashing red, and then after the cutscene ended, Luke was inside of my character's helmet, or he was seeing the same perspective that I was seeing, though I was still controlling the character, and it just did it for a little while. Also, when we loaded up in Combat Evolved at the very beginning, when I looked at the cryopod, things looked just a little off, to say the least. We have no idea what triggered this, but for whatever reason, recently when we're just filming some footage for a video we just did, and neither Master Chief had any head. In Halo 2, especially on the level Regret, there's this weird bleed through effect with some of the elites, especially noticeable on the gondolas if you have a sniper rifle, where you can actually see a lot of the enemies through the walls of the gondola because they have these shiny reflective lights that somehow just bleed through the surfaces. And in Halo 3 ODST, for whatever reason, or just probably likely a very simple oversight, this door right here has the wrong texture on it. It's supposed to have the door that looks like this, but instead they put the door that looks like this on this door that obviously the shape doesn't line up for. But hey, Tepic pointed this out to us one time, and it just shows how much detail we spend looking into every little corner of ODST looking for any answer to what those darn glyphs mean. Also, another one that might not fully count, but we wanted to talk about it, is just the hilariousness that kind of ensues if you are playing the Master Chief Collection on the PC and you just lower the resolution and the graphics as low as possible, as if you're running on a very, very crappy netbook from 2009 or something like that. Sorry, not trying to make any of you feel personally attacked. I know you guys are hardcore Halo PC players, but just experiencing Halo in a completely different way is unique to say the least. There's also some instances where maybe the skybox looks really weird. Some of you might not fully remember this until I bring it up now, but if you played Halo 2 campaign back in the day and your disc had maybe just a little bit of regular wear and tear on the level outskirts or even Metropolis, and some of the other levels too, sometimes the sky or skybox would completely fall apart or have this weird bleed through effect of structures that once were there. Like maybe at one specific camera angle, you were looking up at a building and then you walked away and you look up at the sky and you might see some outline of what the building once looked like, kind of. It's really hard to explain, but hopefully we got enough visual representation to showcase this. But I remember back in the day when I played through Halo 2, I spent a good amount of time wondering if I just left my Xbox on for too long and burned an image into my screen. Definitely wasn't the case. It was just Halo 2 and my disc being a little bit scuffed. Also, speaking of weird skyboxes, on the Maw, if you can break out of the map by jumping over here and you look at the graphics on the older resolution, it just looks really odd, just the way the whole skybox is. Similarly, on Damnation in Halo Combat Evolved, if you look out the windows and just glance off into the distance, you can see some water for a bit, but then you can just see this giant tile of textures or something that's just there. It doesn't look very natural, but it is one of those little nuanced things that I do like to point out to people who might not have recognized that in Combat Evolved all those years ago. We also can't forget the fact that in Halo Combat Evolved, we had the legendary level Battle Creek introduced for multiplayer, and despite the water looking like it was some plasma energy shield, it does look a little bit more dated than other textures in Halo games. For instance, when Beaver Creek rolled around for Halo 2, they definitely did revise the water effect on that level. Okay, and then this next one 100% does not count for this video, but I had a theory and it kind of is related to the same thing at the same time. Not at all, really, but if for whatever reason someone is actually listening to this in a release of a video, it means Luke thought this was a dumb enough idea to include in the final release of the video and greenlit it, and for that, thank you, Luke, for not cutting this. But at the end of Halo 4, I have a really interesting theory on how Cortana Cortana actually was able to save Master Chief, and it's all based off of a texture. At the end, after Master Chief detonates the nuke, he's in this blue textured spherical area. And I suspect, if you've seen the Disney Pixar movie The Incredibles, you know how Elastigirl can like extend herself into a parachute or whatever? I theorize that Cortana saved Master Chief by stretching her body out into a big, flat, and rounded sphere around Master Chief and then just duplicated herself to talk to him. But I just think this is such a hilarious visual if you think of it that way, and therefore it definitely is one of the most interesting visual things that have happened in all of the Halo franchise. Probably not canon, but in my head canon, that's how it happened. So what did you guys think of these visual oddities? Are there any that we missed out on that you are a huge fan of? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos like this. By the way, if you didn't know, we have a podcast called the Rocket Boys Podcast, which we've been uploading 2 new episodes on very recently, and we have more to come in the future. We actually recently had Rejected Shotgun on, the guy who discovered that Guardian thing and popularized it, and it's just really cool to get to sit down and talk to him and have a good time, and some chaos and hilarity ensued when we started looking into potential Halo leaks, and just a good time. So make sure you guys do check out our podcast and subscribe to it just to show us some extra support, even if you only watch like 10 minutes of it. We do put the little chapter things at the bottom so you can pick your topics and jump straight to that point, and you don't have to sit through the whole thing if you're not interested. So do go check it out. It would mean the world to us. Otherwise, we'll see you all next time with a new video.